I'm Dr. Nathaniel Ravencroft, and I've been the chief forensic pathologist at Shadowmere Regional Medical Center in eastern Vermont for 27 years. Or at least I was until I submitted my resignation letter last Tuesday morning. During my career, I've performed over 6,200 autopsies, signed countless death certificates, and examined every conceivable form of human mortality. But what I'm about to tell you about are the 3 cases that made me realize death certificates aren't just unreliable, they're actively concealing horrors that challenge the very nature of what we understand about life and death. Shadowmere Regional Medical Center sits in the heart of Vermont's most isolated county, serving a sprawling area of dense forests, abandoned mining towns and communities that time seems to have forgotten. As the chief forensic pathologist, I've handled everything from routine elderly deaths to the most complex criminal investigations that have crossed state lines and involved federal agencies. My jurisdiction covers nearly 900 square miles of some of the most remote territory in New England. I've examined victims of industrial accidents from the old copper mines, hikers who vanished in the endless wilderness, and cases so unusual that they've been written up in forensic journals across the country. The isolation of our region means that when something truly bizarre happens, there's nowhere else to send it. Every unexplained death, every mysterious circumstance, every case that defies conventional medical understanding ends up on my examination table. I've testified before Congress about forensic procedures. I've trained FBI agents in advanced autopsy techniques. I've consulted on cases from Alaska to Florida, building a reputation as someone who could find answers where others found only questions. My peers respected my thoroughness, my attention to detail, and my ability to extract truth from even the most decomposed remains. The local police departments relied on me completely. When Detective Sarah Morrison from the Vermont State Police brought me a case, she knew I would deliver accurate, reliable findings that would hold up in any courtroom. When the families of victims needed closure, they trusted that I would provide them with honest answers about their loved ones' final moments. That trust, that certainty, that unshakable confidence in my abilities, it was all built on a foundation that I believed was solid. 27 years of examining the dead had taught me to read the stories that bodies tell. I thought I understood the language of death itself, but some stories are written in languages that human beings were never meant to learn. The case that shattered my understanding of mortality arrived on a fog-shrouded October morning in 2023. I was in my office reviewing the previous day's cases when my lead autopsy technician Marcus Sterling burst through the door with an expression of barely contained panic. "Dr. Ravencroft, we need you in examination room C immediately. There's something wrong with the Blackthorn case." Serafina Blackthorn. The name alone had been causing whispers throughout the medical center for the past 48 hours. She was 29 years old, a freelance photographer who specialized in abandoned buildings and forgotten places. According to the police report, she'd been found in the basement of the old Millbrook textile factory, a building that had been abandoned since 1987 and was scheduled for demolition. The discovery had been made by a demolition crew doing preliminary assessments. They'd found her body in what appeared to have once been a storage room, lying on the concrete floor surrounded by her photography equipment. The scene was undisturbed, suggesting she had been alone when whatever happened to her occurred. "What kind of problem, Marcus?" I asked, following him down the corridor toward the examination rooms. "You need to see it yourself, doctor. I don't know how to explain what we're dealing with." The moment I entered examination room C, I knew this case would be different from anything in my extensive experience. The air itself felt heavy, oppressive, with an unusual metallic taste that made my mouth feel dry. The temperature seemed to have dropped several degrees below the room's normal climate-controlled environment. Serafina lay on the examination table, and my first thought was how remarkably preserved she appeared for someone who had allegedly been dead for over a week. Her skin retained a pale but healthy color, not the waxy yellow or gray pallor typical of extended post-mortem periods. Her long auburn hair was clean and seemed to shimmer under the fluorescent lights, lacking the lank, lifeless appearance I would have expected. But it was her expression that immediately caught my attention. Most bodies arrive with faces that reflect their final moments: pain, fear, surprise, or the peaceful emptiness that comes with expected death. Serafina's face wore something I had never encountered before, a slight smile, as if she had discovered something amusing just before dying. "When was she brought in?" I asked Marcus, pulling on my examination gloves. "2 nights ago, around 11:30 p.m. "But Dr. Ravencroft, look at this." He handed me the initial assessment report completed by Dr. Victoria Ashworth, our night pathologist. According to her documentation, Serafina exhibited all the standard indicators of death: No pulse, no respiratory activity, body temperature matching ambient conditions, and fixed pupils that showed no response to light stimulation. But Dr. Ashworth had also noted several anomalies that she couldn't explain. Seraphina's fingernails appeared to have been recently manicured, despite being found in a dusty abandoned building. Her lips retained a natural pink color rather than the blue-tinged pallor of oxygen deprivation. Most puzzling of all, there were no signs of rigor mortis, even though she had allegedly been dead for over 168 hours. Has anyone else examined her since Dr. Ashworth's initial assessment? I inquired. That's just it, Doctor. Dr. Ashworth completed her examination and left detailed notes, but when the day shift arrived yesterday morning, none of the evidence she documented was visible anymore. I looked at him sharply. What do you mean, not visible? Marcus opened a manila folder containing photographs from Dr. Ashworth's examination. The images showed Seraphina with obvious signs of early decomposition, slight discoloration around the abdomen, beginning lividity patterns, and the characteristic clouding of the corneas. But the woman lying before me now showed none of these indicators. Marcus, are we absolutely certain this is the same body? I checked the identification tags 3 times, Doctor. Same fingerprints, same distinctive birthmark on her left shoulder, same small scar above her right eyebrow. It's definitely Seraphina Blackthorne. I began my examination, starting with external observations. Seraphina's skin felt unusually warm for a body that had been refrigerated for nearly 48 hours. When I checked her mouth, I discovered that her canine teeth were significantly more pronounced than indicated in her dental records, almost fang-like in their sharpness and length. The photography equipment found at the scene had been brought in as evidence, and I reviewed it while conducting my examination. Her camera contained dozens of images from inside the Millbrook textile factory. The photos showed typical urban exploration shots, empty rooms with peeling wallpaper, rusted machinery, broken windows casting dramatic shadows. But the final sequence of images was disturbing. They showed Seraphina setting up her camera for what appeared to be self-portraits in the basement storage room where she was found. In the first few self-timer shots, she appeared normal, smiling at the camera with the typical expression of someone documenting their adventure. Then the images became progressively stranger. In each subsequent photo, Seraphina's smile grew wider, more unnatural, revealing those unusually sharp canine teeth. Her eyes, which started as their documented hazel color, became darker in each frame. By the final image, her eyes appeared completely black, reflecting the camera flash like polished obsidian. The timestamp on the last photograph was taken at 11:47 p.m. on October 15th, exactly 1 week before her body was discovered. As I continued my external examination, I discovered puncture wounds on Seraphina's neck that hadn't been noted in any of the police reports. They were small, precise holes positioned directly over her carotid artery. The wounds appeared fresh, with no signs of healing or infection that would be expected if they had been inflicted before death. Marcus, were these neck wounds documented in the scene photographs? He examined the police photos carefully. No, Doctor, they're not visible in any of the crime scene images. I began the internal examination with growing unease. The moment I made the standard Y incision across Seraphina's chest, her blood should have been coagulated and darkened. Instead, it flowed freely and maintained a bright red coloration that was impossible for someone who had been deceased for over a week. Her internal organs were in pristine condition. Not only did they show no signs of decomposition, they appeared healthier than those of most living patients I had encountered during my medical training. Her heart tissue was strong and undamaged. Her lungs were clear and pink. Her liver showed no signs of toxicity or disease. Most disturbing of all, when I extracted tissue samples for microscopic examination, the cells showed signs of active metabolism. Under the microscope, I could observe cellular activity that should have ceased at the moment of death, but the final sequence of images was disturbing. They showed Seraphina setting up her camera for what appeared to be self-portraits in the basement storage room where she was found. In the first few self-timer shots, she appeared normal, smiling at the camera with the typical expression of someone documenting their adventure. Then the images became progressively stranger. In each subsequent photo, Seraphina's smile grew wider, more unnatural, revealing those unusually sharp canine teeth. Her eyes, which started as their documented hazel color, became darker in each frame. By the final image, her eyes appeared completely black, reflecting the camera flash like polished obsidian. The timestamp on the last photograph was taken at 11:47 p.m. on October 15th, exactly 1 week before her body was discovered. As I continued my external examination, I discovered puncture wounds on Seraphina's neck that hadn't been noted in any of the police reports. They were small, precise holes positioned directly over her carotid artery. The wounds appeared fresh,
with no signs of healing or infection that would be expected if they had been inflicted before death. Marcus, were these neck wounds documented in the scene photographs? He examined the police photos carefully. No, doctor, they're not visible in any of the crime scene images. I began the internal examination with growing unease. The moment I made the standard Y incision across Serafina's chest, her blood should have been coagulated and darkened. Instead, it flowed freely and maintained a bright red coloration that was impossible for someone who had been deceased for over a week. Her internal organs were in pristine condition. Not only did they show no signs of decomposition, they appeared healthier than those of most living patients I had encountered during my medical training. Her heart tissue was strong and undamaged. Her lungs were clear and pink. Her liver showed no signs of toxicity or disease. Most disturbing of all, when I extracted tissue samples for microscopic examination, the cells showed signs of active metabolism. Under the microscope, I could observe cellular activity that should have ceased at the moment of death.
I was in the middle of examining Serafina's brain tissue when the impossible occurred. As I made the initial incision to remove her brain for analysis, her eyes opened, not the gradual flutter that might occur if someone were regaining consciousness after being unconscious. Her eyes snapped open instantly, fully alert and aware, locking onto mine with an intensity that made my blood freeze in my veins. But these were not the hazel eyes documented in her driver's license or passport. They were completely black, like staring into two infinite voids. And in those black depths, I swear I saw something moving, something that seemed to recognize me and find my terror amusing. "Hello, Dr. Ravencroft," she said in a voice that was simultaneously her own and something else entirely. The sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, reverberating through my bones rather than simply entering through my ears. I stumbled backward, my scalpel falling to the floor with a metallic clatter that echoed through the examination room like a gunshot. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears, and my hands were shaking uncontrollably. "Marcus," I called out, but when I turned to look for my technician, he was nowhere to be seen. The examination room, which had been occupied by two people just moments before, now contained only myself and the impossible woman on the table. When I turned back to Serafina, her eyes had closed again. She lay motionless, exactly as she had been throughout the examination. I checked her vitals frantically. No pulse, no breathing, body temperature matching the room's ambient conditions. By every medical measure available to me, she was dead. But I had heard her speak. I had seen those black eyes focus on me with unmistakable intelligence and awareness. I ran from the examination room and found Marcus in the hallway, reviewing paperwork at his desk. "Marcus, did you hear that? Did you hear her speak?" He looked at me with concern. "Doctor, I've been out here for the past 10 minutes. You asked me to give you privacy to complete the brain examination. I haven't heard anything unusual. You didn't see her eyes open?" "Sir, I haven't been in the examination room since you began the internal procedures." I stared at him, trying to process what had happened. Had I experienced some kind of hallucination brought on by the stress of the unusual case? Was my mind playing tricks on me after decades of examining the dead? But when I returned to examination room C, I discovered something that convinced me I wasn't losing my sanity. The Y incision I had made across Serafina's chest was healing. Not rapidly, but visibly. The edges of the surgical cut were slowly drawing together, the flesh knitting itself back together in a process that defied every law of biology and physics I understood. Marcus saw it too this time. "Dr. Ravencroft, that's medically impossible." "I know what's medically impossible, Marcus, but I'm watching it happen." After securing Serafina's body in our most isolated cold storage unit, I spent the remainder of that day researching everything I could find about unexplained post-mortem phenomena. My medical school training had never covered anything remotely similar to what I had witnessed. I started with conventional medical literature, searching for cases of delayed rigor mortis, unusual preservation, or any documented instances of apparent cellular activity after clinical death. The results were disappointing. A few scattered reports of bodies that decomposed slower than expected, but nothing that approached the impossibilities I had observed with Serafina. My search expanded to more obscure medical journals and international case studies. Here I found references to something called suspended animation death syndrome in a 1943 paper from a Romanian medical examiner. The author, Dr. Vlad Cornelius, described several cases of bodies that exhibited signs of ongoing biological activity despite meeting all clinical definitions of death. Dr. Cornelius's paper had been largely dismissed by the medical community and was eventually retracted from the journal that published it. But the cases he described bore striking similarities to Serafina's condition: preserved appearance, lack of typical decomposition, and what he termed post-mortem consciousness events. I found similar reports scattered across decades of obscure medical literature. A 1967 case from Scotland involving a young woman found dead in ancient ruins. A 1981 incident from Louisiana where a body reportedly spoke during autopsy. A 1995 case from Oregon that resulted in the examining pathologist's resignation from medicine entirely. All of these cases shared common elements: young women found dead in isolated or historically significant locations, bodies that defied normal decomposition patterns, and examining physicians who reported impossible phenomena during autopsy procedures. But it was a locked filing cabinet in my own office that provided the most disturbing revelation. Among my predecessor's files, I discovered a folder labeled Anomalous Cases Being Classified. Dr. Edmund Thornfield had been the chief pathologist at Shadowmere before me, and his reputation for thoroughness and scientific integrity had been beyond question. The folder contained documentation of 3 cases from the 1980s that Dr. Thornfield had never officially reported: young women, all found dead in remote locations throughout Vermont, all exhibiting the same impossible characteristics I had observed with Serafina. Dr. Thornfield's notes grew increasingly frantic with each case. His handwriting, normally precise and clinical, became erratic and desperate. His final entry, dated just weeks before his early retirement, read, "The conventional explanation is insufficient. These cases represent something that challenges our fundamental understanding of death itself. I cannot continue to sign death certificates for subjects who demonstrate ongoing consciousness and biological activity. The authorities must be made aware, but who would believe such claims? I am retiring from pathology immediately. May God forgive me for the certificates I have signed." Armed with Dr. Thornfield's hidden files and my own impossible observations, I attempted to contact my superiors about Serafina's case. My first call was to Dr. Helena Morrison, the Chief Medical Officer for the Vermont Department of Health. "Nathaniel, I've known you for 15 years, she said after I described my findings. "You're one of the most respected pathologists in New England. Are you absolutely certain about what you're reporting?" "Helena, I've documented everything. Photographs, tissue samples, detailed observations. This case defies conventional medical explanation. I need you to understand something, Nathaniel. Cases like this, they require very careful handling. There are protocols for unusual findings that might cause public concern, the kind that protect both the integrity of the medical system and public confidence in official death determinations. I'm sending a team to review your findings and provide guidance on how to proceed." The team that arrived at Shadowmere the next morning consisted of 3 individuals who identified themselves only by their last names: Dr. Sterling, Dr. Cross, and Dr. Blackwood. They wore federal identification badges but provided no details about their specific agency or authority. They spent 6 hours examining Serafina's body, reviewing my documentation, and conducting their own tests. Their equipment was more sophisticated than anything in our facility, and they worked with the efficiency of people who had encountered similar cases before. Dr. Ravencroft, Dr. Sterling addressed me after completing their examination. "Your findings are concerning, but they fall under federal jurisdiction due to the unusual nature of the circumstances. What does that mean for my investigation?" "It means your investigation is complete. We'll be taking custody of the remains and all associated evidence. You'll need to complete a standard death certificate listing cause of death as accidental trauma and manner as accidental. I can't sign a death certificate that I know to be false." Dr. Croft stepped forward. "Doctor, you have 2 choices. You can sign the certificate as directed and continue your career as one of Vermont's most respected pathologists. Or you can refuse, in which case we'll be forced to question your competence and recommend a comprehensive psychiatric evaluation." The threat was clear: sign the false certificate or face professional destruction. I signed Serafina Blackthorn's death certificate that afternoon, listing her cause of death as acute trauma due to accidental fall and manner of death as accidental. Every word was a lie, but the alternative was the end of my career and my credibility. But as I watched them load Serafina's body into their unmarked vehicle, I noticed something that chilled me to the bone. Through the black body bag, I could see movement, subtle, rhythmic, like someone breathing. In the days following Serafina's case, I tried to return to normal operations at Shadowmere Regional Medical Center. I examined routine deaths, completed standard autopsies, and signed death certificates without question. But the memory of those black eyes and that impossible voice haunted every moment of my working day. I began having nightmares about bodies that wouldn't stay dead, about death certificates that rewrote themselves, about cold storage units filled with the sounds of breathing and whispered conversations. My sleep became fractured and fitful,
broken by dreams of examination rooms where the dead sat up to greet me with knowing smiles. My colleagues noticed the change in my behavior. Dr. Sarah Whitmore, my deputy chief pathologist, expressed concern about my increasing tendency to over-examine routine cases. Nathaniel, you spent 4 hours on a straightforward cardiac death yesterday. The family is waiting for answers, and you're treating every case like it's a federal investigation. How do I know it's straightforward, Sarah? How do I know any of them are what they appear to be? Because you've been doing this for 27 years. You know how to read the signs. You know how to determine cause of death. But that was exactly the problem. I had been certain I knew how to read the signs until Seraphina Blackthorne opened her eyes and spoke to me from beyond death. Now every body that crossed my examination table might be harboring secrets that I lacked the courage to discover. The breaking point came 3 weeks after Seraphina's case. I was performing a routine autopsy on an elderly man who had died of apparent natural causes when I noticed something that made my hands tremble. His fingernails had grown since his death, just as Seraphina's had. I spent the next 6 hours examining every inch of his body, searching for puncture wounds, testing tissue samples for impossible cellular activity, and waiting for him to open his eyes and speak to me. The examination that should have taken 90 minutes stretched long into the night. When I finally completed my work, I had found nothing unusual. The elderly man was simply dead, exactly as he appeared to be, but the experience convinced me that I could no longer trust my own judgment or my ability to distinguish between normal death and the impossible phenomena I had witnessed.
2 days before I submitted my resignation, I received a call that made my worst fears seem inadequate. Detective Morrison from the Vermont State Police was calling about a body that had been found in the abandoned Ravens Hollow Cemetery, a graveyard that had been closed to new burials since 1923. Dr. Ravencroft, we have a young woman, approximately 25 years old. She was found lying on top of one of the old graves, perfectly preserved despite being in the elements for an estimated 2 weeks. My mouth went dry. What's her condition? That's the strange part. She looks like she could be sleeping. No signs of decomposition, no animal predation, no weather damage. It's like she just laid down and stopped. I'll be right there. As I drove toward Ravens Hollow Cemetery, I couldn't escape the feeling that whatever had begun with Seraphina Blackthorne was far from over. The federal agents had taken her body, but they couldn't take the knowledge that death certificates were sometimes lies written to conceal truths too terrible for public consumption. The woman at Ravens Hollow would be the second case that would force me to confront the possibility that death itself might not be the final state I had always believed it to be. And if death wasn't final, then what did that mean for the thousands of certificates I had signed throughout my career? How many of the dead were actually dead, and how many were something else entirely? But this story about Seraphina Blackthorne and the impossible things I witnessed in Examination Room C, this is just the first of 3 cases that destroyed my faith in everything I thought I knew about mortality. The second case would involve a woman who had been dead for over 2 centuries but whose body remained perfectly preserved. And the third case would reveal that some of the dead don't just refuse to stay buried, they actively hunt the living. Coming up in part 2, the woman in Ravens Hollow Cemetery, and the discovery that would make Seraphina Blackthorne seem like the beginning of a nightmare I was only starting to understand, because after 27 years of examining the dead, I've learned that death certificates can be the most dangerous lies ever written, and some truths are buried in graveyards for very good reasons. After 27 years as Vermont's chief forensic pathologist, I thought I understood death. Then Seraphina Blackthorne opened her eyes during autopsy and spoke to me from beyond the grave. Federal agents seized her body and forced me to sign a false death certificate. But Seraphina was just the beginning of a nightmare that would destroy everything I believed about mortality. The call from Detective Morrison came at 3:47 a.m. on a Thursday morning that would end my career forever. Ravens Hollow Cemetery had been abandoned since 1923, its weathered headstones marking graves from Vermont's earliest settlements. What the detective described defied every natural law I knew. Dr. Ravencroft, the body is lying directly on top of the Blackthorne family mausoleum. She's been here for weeks, completely exposed to the elements, but she looks like she just fell asleep an hour ago. The name Blackthorne made my blood run cold. Did you say Blackthorne? Yes, sir. Strange coincidence considering your recent case. When I arrived at Ravens Hollow, I found a scene that would haunt me for the rest of my life. The woman lay sprawled across the marble roof of an ornate mausoleum, her arms positioned as if she had been trying to claw her way inside. She appeared to be in her mid-20s, with the same auburn hair and pale complexion as Seraphina Blackthorne. But this woman had been dead for far longer than the 2 weeks Detective Morrison estimated. Her clothing was from another era entirely, a Victorian-style dress that should have rotted away decades ago but remained perfectly preserved. Around her neck hung a locket containing a photograph of a man who looked exactly like the federal agent who had identified himself as Dr. Blackwood. "Have you moved the body?" I asked the detective. "No, sir. We're waiting for your assessment before disturbing the scene." As I began my external examination, the impossibilities multiplied. The woman's skin retained warmth despite the October cold. Her fingernails were long and sharp, filed to distinct points. Most disturbing of all, carved into the marble beneath her body was a message that hadn't been there when the cemetery groundskeeper had made his rounds the previous week. "Serafina came home. The others are waking." I performed my examination with growing dread. Like Serafina, this woman showed no signs of decomposition despite apparent extended exposure. Her blood remained fresh and red. Her organs were in pristine condition, but it was her mouth that revealed the truth I had been too terrified to accept. Her canine teeth were elongated into distinct fangs, identical to what I had observed with Serafina. But more importantly, between her teeth were traces of fresh blood that DNA analysis would later prove belonged to 3 different people, all of whom had died in Shadowmere County within the past month. As I completed the examination, the woman's eyes opened, but this time I was prepared for the impossible. Her eyes were the same hazel color as Serafina's had been in life, but as I watched, they slowly darkened to the familiar obsidian black. "Hello again, Dr. Ravencroft," she said in a voice that was both her own and unmistakably Serafina's. "Did you think we wouldn't find each other?" This time I didn't run. This time I demanded answers. "What are you?" "We are what your death certificates say cannot exist. We are what your medical science refuses to acknowledge. We are the reason your predecessor fled from this place, and why you will do the same." The woman sat up on the marble slab, moving with fluid grace, despite having been motionless for weeks. "Serafina was my descendant, Doctor. The Blackthorn line has been dying and returning for over 2 centuries. Your federal friends know this, of course. They've been managing our kind for decades. Managing your kind. Did you think Serafina was the first? We've been documented, catalogued, and contained by various government agencies since the 1940s. Every pathologist who discovers our nature eventually faces the same choice you're facing now." She gestured toward the mausoleum beneath her. "This is where it began. Constance Blackthorn died 1847, buried here with her husband and children. But Constance didn't stay buried, did she? Neither did her descendants. We die, we return, and we feed. The cycle continues, generation after generation." The woman who identified herself as Constance Blackthorn, the original matriarch, revealed the truth that had been hidden in death certificates for over 175 years. The Blackthorn family carried a curse that prevented true death. When they died, they returned with an insatiable hunger for human blood and the ability to create others like themselves through their bite. "Every pathologist who has worked in this region eventually encounters one of us," Constance explained as we stood among the weathered headstones. "Dr. Thornfield discovered the truth in the 1990s. Dr. Ashford before him in the 1970s. Dr. Cornelius in the 1950s. All of them signed false death certificates. All of them eventually resigned or disappeared." She led me through the cemetery, pointing out graves that had been disturbed from the inside, dozens of them dating back over a century. Each headstone bore the name of someone who had died young, been buried, and later clawed their way out of their graves. "The federal agents aren't trying to cover up isolated incidents, Doctor. They're managing a population of the undead that has been growing for over a century. Every false death certificate you sign helps them maintain the illusion that death is permanent and final." The most terrifying revelation came when Constance showed me the cemetery's records. Of the 847 people buried in Ravens Hollow since 1847, 312 had been exhumed over the decades due to administrative errors or family requests. But the exhumation records showed that 312 graves had been found empty, with evidence of the occupants having escaped from within. "Where are they now?" I asked. "Living among you, working jobs, maintaining relationships, appearing completely human except for their need to feed. The agents relocate them to different regions when they become too conspicuous. Your friend Dr. Blackwood is one of us, Doctor. He's been managing our kind for the government since 1987. As dawn approached, Constance made me an offer that would haunt me forever. You have 3 choices, Dr. Ravencroft. First, you can continue signing false death certificates and living with the knowledge of what you've discovered. Many of your predecessors chose this path. They spent their remaining years documenting us while publicly denying our existence. What's the second choice? You can join us. The bite that creates our kind also grants immortality. You would never age, never die, never lose the loved ones you care about. But you would need to feed, and you would become part of the system you're trying to expose." I stared at her in horror.
And the third choice, you resign from medicine, move far from here, and spend the rest of your natural life knowing that death certificates are lies and that monsters walk among the living. Most pathologists choose this option. It's the safest, though not the most comfortable. The choice wasn't difficult. I could never sign another false death certificate, and I would never become one of the creatures I had discovered. That left only resignation and exile. There's something else you need to know, Constance said as I prepared to leave Raven's Hollow forever. We're not the only ones. Every region has its own impossible cases, its own supernatural populations that require management. Shapeshifters in the Pacific Northwest, vengeful spirits in the Louisiana bayous, ancient entities in the New Mexico deserts. How many pathologists know the truth? Hundreds, maybe thousands. We exist in the shadows of every medical system in the world. Death certificates are the most important lies ever written, Doctor. They maintain the illusion that death is natural, permanent, and comprehensible. I submitted my resignation to Dr. Helena Morrison the following Monday morning. I didn't mention Constance Blackthorne or the truth about Raven's Hollow Cemetery. I simply cited personal reasons and requested immediate release from my position. Nathaniel, you're one of the most respected pathologists in New England. Are you certain about this decision? I can no longer sign death certificates with confidence in their accuracy. She studied me carefully. I see. Well, these things happen. The stress of examining the dead takes its toll on all of us eventually. Your replacement will be Dr. Marcus Sterling. He comes highly recommended by federal agencies. Dr. Marcus Sterling, the same name as one of the federal agents who had taken Serafina's body. I moved to a small town in Montana where I now work as a general practitioner, treating minor illnesses and avoiding any cases that might involve death certificates. But the knowledge I gained at Shadowmere follows me everywhere. When I read obituaries, I wonder which deaths were real and which were administrative conveniences. When I see news reports about mysterious disappearances, I suspect some of the missing have simply been relocated by federal management programs. When families ask me about their loved ones' final moments, I struggle to provide comfort while knowing that death itself might not be the ending they believe it to be. Serafina Blackthorne and Constance Blackthorne taught me that death certificates are the most dangerous lies ever written. They're not medical documents. They're tools of mass deception designed to hide the fact that death isn't always permanent and the dead don't always stay buried. The federal agents continue their work managing populations of the supernatural while maintaining the illusion of normal mortality. Pathologists across the country sign false death certificates every day, either willingly or under threat. And somewhere in Vermont, the Blackthorne family continues to die and return, generation after generation. So the next time you see a death certificate, remember that it might be documenting something that never actually died. The next time you visit a cemetery, consider that some of the graves might be empty. And the next time someone dies under unusual circumstances, ask yourself whether they're really gone or simply waiting for the right moment to return. Because after 27 years of examining the dead, I've learned that death certificates are lies, and the dead don't always stay dead. Some truths are too terrible for death certificates to contain, but now you know the truth. The question is, what will you do with it?